So I don't ever want to be that leader who is inventing dragons, is creating chaos because I like the chaos. And so that, I would say, is a critical shifting point for me, where I just became next level aware of how important this dance between knowing yourself and then knowing when to get out of the way was as a leader.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another knowledge bomb episode of Lead to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential, and together we can change the world. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Bessi Graham. If this is your first time joining us, please consider subscribing and hit that notification bell and hit that like button. This will be greatly appreciated in helping getting out this content to great leaders and great individuals like yourself. Bessi is an award-winning entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience working with business owners, governments, and large funding bodies to bring doing good and making money back together. Please help me welcome Bessi with leadership awareness. This is Cedric Francis, and you're listening to Lead to Greatness.
You know, at the heart of any aspects related to leadership, the old saying of you can't lead others until you lead yourself first, the aspects of this work beginning with us as leaders is critical. And I think that pattern is everywhere, and we are more at risk of it as entrepreneurs and people who are prone to action and driven to, okay, what are we going to do about this? Like, I don't just want to talk about it. I want to do something. The downside of that, so if we go to any of these aspects, my wise mother used to always say our strengths are our weaknesses. So there's a flip side to everything. And as entrepreneurs, that piece that makes us successful, that gives us drive, that allows us to set a goal and achieve it when others think it's not possible. The flip side of that is we can have a tendency to hear someone else's goal or what the world tells us success looks like or what a profitable business is. We hear that, we set it as our goal, and we charge after it without the pause, without the reflection and self-awareness that would allow us to actually question, hang on, is this something I actually want? Is this life-giving for me? Or is it actually something that's going to exhaust me, that is fundamentally at odds with who I am as a person or what I believe in? We all can fall into that trap very easily. But what it highlights is that for us to stay in that space of being able to bring our best, be able to step fully into who we have the potential to become, actually requires us to tune in more and to become aware of that tendency and the shadow side of our drive and moving to action. And just to make sure that we are actually really conscious of what it is we're chasing and whether we even want to be chasing that.
Simon Sinek years ago came out with this book called Start With Why. And I believe that's exactly what you're saying. And I'm listening to you. I'm listening to you talk, and I can really sense that even right now in this current part of your life, you're very self-aware and what you want and your why and where you're going. Let's back up a little bit, because I can hear it. You're right there. It's like, okay, I know exactly where I'm at. I know exactly where I'm trying to get to. I know what road I'm at. I know the crossroad. I know how to get there. The GPS is, I'm in the right direction. I can sense that. But I want to step back a little bit, and I want to talk about, how did you get to that point? Or have you always been focused and always been aware like you are now?
So I think I've always been, I'm deeply introverted. So I've always had the tendency to be in my head, to reflect, to be sort of sitting back and thinking, what's this all about? And asking questions. So my natural tendency is to, the way that I clarify my thinking, the way that I get my energy, is to retreat and be by myself, so that the reflection is a natural part of who I am and has always been present. But if we go to, okay, then what have some of those critical points been, or the crossroads where that has become much clearer to me and then I've intentionally chosen to step into it? I would say that a critical piece of this aspect of wanting to know myself deeply, where I add the most value, but on the flip side, wanting to also know where I need to get out of the way and I am not the right person to be in the mix.
Yeah.
That became very clear to me in my early 20s. So when I was studying at university, I did a whole bunch of things related to politics, international relations. My master's focused on counterterrorism. So very interested in that leadership space.
Wow.
And how people influence and change. What does different styles of leadership, how do they play out and affect people? But there was a country that I was really fascinated by that had fought for decades for independence, had a whole bunch of sort of guerrilla warfare and different things going on, and had these incredibly different leaders in the mix. And so I had studied them at university, and then in my early 20s, I had the opportunity to spend time in the country and interviewed all these different leaders. And I ended up framing my master's thesis around their different styles of leadership. And the piece that stood out to me was an aspect related to situational leadership, which I think taps into the aspects of knowing yourself and reading the room, reading the context that you're operating in and adjusting to that. And then also this fascinating lesson around if we are not aware, if we do not have that self-awareness, we can actually undermine our own legacy and the incredible change we've created. So let me tell you a little story about these different leadership styles. So in this country, you had this incredibly charismatic leader who had really led the revolutionary side of their battle for independence. And he was an amazing man. But once they achieved independence, he couldn't get out of his own way. And actually, his preference was for there to be chaos and for him to be the savior and to step in. And so while he had these other leaders in the mix who had deep skills as managers and creating order out of chaos and, putting systems and processes in place, he continued to go out into the community and sort of just create unrest because it was his natural way of leading.
Wow.
It was how he, it was his own self, worth and image of who he was as a person. He could not shift gears. And so as someone in my early 20s, watching that and seeing that here, they had a newly rebuilt parliament and offices, and he refused to work there and still was working out of a bombed out building, with rain dripping in on the computers.
Wow.
And I was young and fascinated by how this man that I knew was extraordinary and had done amazing things was so unable to shift. And so that was a real turning point for me that has influenced every business I've founded and run. And my tuning into one of my roles is to make myself redundant, because I know that I like the kicking open of the doors, but I will get bored. And my partner always says, Bessi needs a dragon to slay. And when there's not a dragon, you'll create one, right? So I don't ever want to be that leader who is inventing dragons, is creating chaos because I like the chaos. And so that, I would say, is a critical shifting point for me, where I just became next level aware of how important this dance between knowing yourself and then knowing when to get out of the way was, as a leader, a critical skill. So, again, I think that if we look at these tendencies, my experience has been that we seem to find it easier to flip to extremes. Right? So we can have very public, extroverted, charismatic type leaders, or we then can have people who flip into the category of being more of a martyr and everything is about others, which comes up a lot in the nonprofit and charitable space, because what we have as a society said is valuable in that space is to be selfless, is to, it's all about service and the other. And so just as much as flipping to the extreme of not getting out of your own way and realizing when your leadership style is not appropriate, the same has occurred many times over when I've worked with social enterprise founders or nonprofit leaders who have found themselves really trapped in this stereotype of what it is to be a servant leader. There's different words people use, but in that space, again, what I find fascinating is that when we take on these personas, or we are living out what has been told to us a certain style of leadership should look like, if it doesn't sit well with who we actually are and how we naturally interact, the way in which it drains people and leads to burnout is something that actually, particularly over the last few years, I've become more and more passionate about and have shifted into then coaching and working with individual business leaders and owners, because what I see is that people are not, whether it's boards of nonprofits or organizations or executives more as a group, people don't really look out for or care for leaders. We're seen as the people who, we solve all the problems, we jump in, we fix it. And yet that work to create that safety and a sense for them of, okay, you also need to be honored and looked after in this, often doesn't happen. And because I have been so heavily in that social sector and the charitable space for decades now, I have seen the downside of that type of leadership that actually drains and burns people out in ways that I don't think are healthy, and that don't actually lead to us being able to, in a sustainable way, create the change we want to in the world, because we're burning out and really taking advantage of leaders who want to make a difference and want to contribute in the world.
What advice would you give to that type of leader?
Well, I think can you actually come to terms with, and not just say you agree with it, but can you come to terms with the fact that doing good and making money can sit together, that things that seem like paradoxes or seem like contradictions aren't necessarily mutually exclusive? Because I think when we've fallen into that trap of thinking, I run a charity, so therefore I can't earn a good income, I can't actually speak up to the board about the requirements of, there's actually not enough funding in the mix, we don't have enough staff, this is burning out my team. When we just accept without questioning the way things have always been done, or what it looks like to lead in a space of contribution and making a difference in the world, then we don't actually get to the great places we could. We don't actually create the solutions to massive problems that we could otherwise achieve. And so I would say that as a leader, if you take seriously that dual role of actually your responsibility and accountability to name difficult things, have the conversations that need to be had, lead your team and organization, and you also take seriously the aspect that you have a mission or a purpose in the world, your comment before about the why, there is a deep reason for what you do. If both those things are true, then even though it might be difficult and uncomfortable, and it might take quite a long time to educate your board or those who fund your organization, you need to start to have those conversations, and you need to start to say, actually, when we think about our organization doing good in the world, part of that relates to the well-being of our team. And if I am burning out my team and they are going home stressed and anxious and then causing multiple flow-on effects that are negative in their own families and communities, are we actually all right with that as an organization? Is that okay? Or are their lives valuable as well? So I think it's about being conscious of, boiling down to, okay, what's actually going on here? What are the questions we need to be asking differently? And what's my role as the leader to actually not just sit back passively and act like I have no control over this and this is just the way it's done. We have no choice. Look, we work for a nonprofit. That's just the way it is. No, you can shift those power dynamics and you can ask different questions and actually say, this is the bar, or this is, the line that is not to be crossed. And yes, at the moment, we may not have enough funding to bring on a new team, but this is collectively our problem as a board or as a funder. What are we going to do about it?
That is a knowledge bomb. I'm listening and I'm like, man, this is really good. And I'm really thinking about calling this podcast Leadership Awakening. And because everything is born, I'm listening to, and it's like a echo in the back about awareness, 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 and
Yeah.
always being aware. And I'm listening to you, and I can tell awareness is so very important to you. And I believe it should be important to every business leader, every
Mhm.
entrepreneur, every leader. This should be a very important topic. I want to shift a little bit to, let's talk about both and. What inspired you to begin this journey and why?
Well, it's interesting. So in terms of the name, both and, it comes back to this idea of wanting people to realize they don't have to choose either or. It's not a
Mm,
it's not a
wow.
situation where that's the case. You can choose both and part of
Oh,
our
man.
creativity, part of us as people who can conceptualize things that don't yet exist, is to say, okay, if I had a both and mindset, if I said, what would it look like to actually work this business model or work this solution until we created that win-win? How would I do it? So start from that place. So for me, really, I would say that I've always been very aware of the fact that that I am a bit of a paradox. I've said many times since I was a kid that I was a walking contradiction. These ideas of
Mm,
sitting in grey spaces and not really fitting in with the kind of normative structures around me has always been how I felt. I never felt like I fitted in wherever I was. And there's a plus side to that. So for me, what that has allowed is that I don't have the same level of fear of rejection or need for people to agree with what I say or for me to fit in,
mm.
because I've never felt that. So I've got nothing to lose.
Wow.
And so my desire really around both and has been to say, when I think about what I want this to be and what I would like my contribution to be, how do I help on two sides of the equation? One, I have this deep passion for social justice, for wanting to see the world be a better place and to be part of contributing to things that I think are important in the world. And so the way that I do that is through my passion for business. And so it's about saying, how do I help awaken the possibility for other business leaders
Mm,
that you can do good and make money?
mm,
So I want to be part of that mindset shift for them to say, how would you look at your business differently? How are you making decisions? How are you spending money? How do we not see good as external to your business, but being about how you are making decisions now as a business leader and start inside the business? So that's the first piece of the passion around both and, is to say business can be a positive agent for change, but only if we actually grapple with and take responsibility for designing these business models that create that win-win of doing good and making money. And on the flip side, it is about my absolute passion and commitment to leaders themselves to say, I want you to feel seen and supported in a way that typically we are not seen and supported as leaders.
yeah.
So I want to create for you that safe space, that place where you can say, oh, I haven't really gone there before, Bessi, but I'm going to trust you and I'm going to, go on this journey to figure out these components that I
Yeah.
need to sort out for myself before I can lead in the way I want to. So it's a dance between those places, with ultimately the goal being, let's actually leave the world better than we found it. Let's bring our best, but do it in a
Yes.
way that doesn't sap us of life, but
Mm,
actually really inspires us as well. Because as leaders, we are equally as important as anyone else. Like, it should not be that
mm.
we sacrifice our own well-being, we sacrifice our own families and relationships because of the good work we're doing in the world. We need to respect both of those pieces. So both and is about saying, okay, if we can do these things without compromising on either one, what would that look like?
Mm.
And keep drilling and keep asking questions until you design something that actually achieves that for you.
Oh man, another knowledge bomb. Betsy, this is good. This is good. I want to talk about something, how you focus on certain areas and some important areas, which is the time, the talent, and the treasures, and helping leaders and helping entrepreneurs align this with their values. I want you to talk a little bit about that, and why is that important and how you do that?
My desire and passion to support leaders so that they can do their great work in the world. Really at the heart of the pattern I see when I talk to leaders is that part of the exhaustion and frustration comes when they think, I'm ticking all the boxes, I'm doing all the right things, I'm working really hard, but I am not actually feeling that sense of freedom and fulfillment. So I'm now from the freedom side, they're either feeling trapped by the decisions they've made, constricted and constrained by the business and the pressure it now creates, that it's actually, they thought they were creating something that would give them freedom and the opposite has proven true. On the fulfillment side, it's this difficult conversation because to the outside world, these people look successful. They have ticked the boxes. They've built an organization that's functioning really well. And so it's awkward to say, I'm not actually feeling fulfilled. This is not satisfying. There's something missing here. And so the journey that I'm taking someone on is to say, okay, if that's what you're wanting to feel, so you're wanting to have that sense of you're in flow, you're experiencing freedom and fulfillment. The deeply human component is to say that in order to feel that, we actually have to be grounded in something. And from my experience, that piece is values. And not values in a generic, unhelpful way of, I often say to people, if you've walked into an office and there's the eagle with the soaring outstretched wings and it's sort of integrity, honesty. It's like, I'm not talking about values in that sense. I'm talking about deeply personal exploration of really what is most important to you. How do you make your decisions? How do you behave? What drives you and is non-negotiable? So the grounded in piece is this sense of knowing ourselves, so the awareness, all the bits we've been talking about. And we are grounded in those values, and it allows us to have this foundation on which to build, to open up that generative space of, okay, what does life now look like? If we just stay there and navel gaze and it's all about us, that's not actually going to create the fulfillment piece. So we need to be grounded in our values, but we need to be moving towards something. There's that old sense of, as humans, there's the phrase, if we're not growing, we're dying. And that can be mistaken as everything's about growth or profit. That's not what I'm talking about when I use the word growth. It's about this sense of, what am I moving towards? So what is my vision? What do I want to be part of in the world? What would I want to contribute towards? And my experience is that when we get to clarity about both of those aspects of what are you grounded in, your values, what are you moving towards, your vision, that is the space where then as leaders, we can start to experience that freedom and fulfillment, because we're not just being one-dimensional. We're not just making everything about us and the ego, but we're also not denying ourselves in the process. We're honoring who we are and what we want and need. But we're also then moving to a place that is bigger than us, because from a fulfillment point of view, that is necessary.
Oh my goodness. Knowledge bombs after knowledge bombs. This is amazing. Amazing. Wow.
So again, if we go back to the both and piece, there's not a right or wrong answer. I often talk about the fact that, we need to take into consideration time and place. So while it might be appropriate in one setting to actually be quite firm and strict on someone because there are core values around our organization of how we do or do not behave. And if someone is at odds with that, then absolutely we need to call that out and say that doesn't happen here. That is not acceptable and we're not going to behave like that. So let me actually model to you what we want and what we expect. Then there will be another situation where someone from a different generation might actually see the world in a very different way to you. And you stopping and not just making the assumption that you are right and that nothing has changed in the last 25 years, but to say, maybe actually the way that we have been going about making decisions, something may have shifted that I am not even tuned into. And instead of being defensive and aggressive, I need to say, okay, I'm having a reaction here. Like, I don't like that you are calling me out on this, but I'm going to pause long enough to process what that is about and work with you from a place of curiosity and openness to say, tell me more. Like, there's something not gelling for me yet. I feel like I don't agree with you, but maybe I'm missing something. Keep talking. Like that back and forward has a level of, it requires you to have some stability. So to be confident enough in yourself that you can go, my authority or position is not threatened by not having all the answers or by being open to someone critiquing what I'm doing. But equally, I'm not going to always back down or let anybody just say, we shouldn't do it like that. There's a new way of doing it. The critical piece, I would say here from a leadership perspective, is our need to own the fact that leadership has a critical aspect of discernment and judgment. So you have to discern in the moment what's needed, and you're going to have to make a judgment call. And at times you will get that wrong, but that is your job. The critical piece that you bring to the mix is around how you think, how you're making decisions, how you actually can conceptualize and what you see as possible as a leader. So that quieting out all of the other noise and distraction and doing that internal work first is actually the most important kind of starting point, if you like, or foundation from a tools or ways to engage as a leader.
Lead to greatness. Each and every one of us can learn on today is awareness. It's been in everything, awareness, because sometimes we find ourselves doing things, doing business, and like Betsy said, we get burned out on it. And you can be successful making millions of dollars and still be burned out and still, end up, just, depression and battling different things, health-wise. So, man, this is so important, Betsy. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this information. I think this was an undertone of mental health with leaders that we definitely need to start paying attention to, because it's getting bad. Everybody is about the grind, and people are committing suicide on drugs and alcohol because they are trying to find coping mechanisms to deal with the real issues that we're not dealing with. So thank you, Bessie. Thank you so much. If someone wants to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go?
So the best approach would be I have a podcast called Both And with Bessi Graham, so we can share that link. So if you're wanting to just sit with and reflect, do the awareness piece more, that's a really good place to start. So listening to that. Then also, if people want to connect with me on either LinkedIn or Instagram or my website, bessigraham.com, I would love for people to reach out. For me, this is a conversation. So I want to know, what are those questions? What are you struggling with? And help from the perspective of just sharing what I know and drilling into those questions, help awaken in you that possibility of, oh, this could be different. How would I approach that?
So we want to thank you for joining us today on the Lead to Greatness podcast. And if this is your first time, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of these amazing episodes. And if you're on iTunes, go ahead and rate the podcast and leave a review. That helps get the word out to great leaders and entrepreneurs like yourself. So we want to thank you for joining us today. So remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace.